Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Nola Simon. I'm your host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. And joining me today is Hilke Schellmann. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Yes, so it's Hilke Schellmann.
Hilke.
Yeah, it's a, German first name, very hard.
Sorry, my dad is actually German, but I don't actually speak German.
Well, the funny thing is Germans don't know the name either, so they're often like Heike, Silke, what? So it is, it is an enigma for anyone I encounter.
Okay, well, that's fine. I'm glad I asked. So thank you. She's the author of The Algorithm, How AI Decides Who Gets Hired, Monitored, Promoted, Fired, and Why We Need to Fight Back Now. And so it was actually interesting how I came across your book, and I want to tell the audience a little bit about how I became aware of your work. And so it started honestly, I started on my own noticing like AI being a trend back when I started my podcast back in like December of 2021. And I interviewed a guy from Eightfold AI, and he told me all about the way they were using it in hiring and firing. But also, he was telling me about how they could identify transferable skills. And I found this very interesting. They had contracts with the government to really kind of identify transferable skills that existed in long-term unemployed people with the goal of actually getting them back to work. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, that's fascinating. I never considered that that was a possibility. Like, and he came up with this example that, if you have somebody who has went to university, they have a math degree, but they have always worked in customer service, you could literally get them into data analysis because the skill sets are really the same, but data analysis is really more future focused and also pays a lot more, right?
Yeah.
So people are sitting on skill sets that are extremely valuable. They don't even realize what the value is of those skill sets. And that really appealed to me because, well, I have a degree in math and I spent 20 years working in customer service. Now, that's how it started. So then I also was aware of a company called Plum who worked with Scotiabank to actually replace their resumes. And so basically, nobody submits a resume for Scotiabank in Canada. They use this AI profile called Plum. Now, I ran a personal profile for myself, and it came up with all kinds of interesting things, except one of the lines was, basically you're better doing work that's doesn't really take any initiative, that it's repetitive and you need structure and you need to be told what to do, basically. And I'm like, yeah, that's not me. Thank you. I'm working for myself. And my podcast, I'm nearing 100 episodes. So it's like, yeah, nobody's been telling me to do my podcast. Thank you very much. But what I wanted to know and why I had approached the CEO of Plum was what does AI actually know about me that is pulling that result? Because
Yeah.
if I'm running my own profile and I notice an inaccuracy in it, so what's causing it? Where is it pulling from? How can I influence that result so that, I'm going to draw something that's more accurate, but also like, what are the repercussions of that inaccuracy, right? And how do you get it removed? How do you get it fixed? Um, and how do you do the due diligence
Yeah.
on doing like on any of that information? Because like if I applied for a job and that came up and the job is about innovation and taking initiative and every job that I'd be sort of interested in, and that's what's coming out of that profile, like that's going to shoot you dead in the water right there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could not get an answer from the company. She didn't initially respond to me because I'm like, I want to interview you. And then she ghosted me. And she even actually walked by me on a stage. I had told her that I would be there and she walked by me and wouldn't talk to me. So it's like, okay. So I've given up on that, but I was fascinated by reading your book because you focused on both of those companies, and I was like, oh, somebody else noticed this and put it together and put it
Yes.
into the book. And
There's
that's
there's a
where
bunch of companies.
I knew I really wanted to interview, but we started. There's one more piece of the story. I had introduced you to somebody else that I had had as a guest on my podcast, and that's Sweta Regmi. She's a career coach up in Sudbury. And I had noticed Sweta trying to get information and trying to get media to actually interview her about concerns that she had about AI and immigrants. You know, if English is not your first language, how does that influence an AI interview? Like these one-way video interviews, you know, do you have accommodations, right? Like if you have a stutter, if you have a lisp, you know, all of these things factor into how you perform. And personally, again, my own personal story going back, there's something about my voice that automated systems do not like. So Siri
Oh,
and Alexa hate me, right? My kids used to razz me because they could get Alexa to talk and Alexa wouldn't respond to me. So they would harass me using Alexa. I've turned Siri off because it so reliably does not understand my voice that it's more hassle than it's worth. And one time, like I had a bad accident. They actually, uh, sorry, I've got music playing somewhere. Can you just pause for a moment?
yeah.
Hang on a second. Oh my God.
What
Talking
was
about
that?
Alexa, it started playing in the living
Ah!
room.
Now it heard you,
Now it
finally.
hears me. This is why I hate it so much because literally it was played like the theme song from the Mickey Mouse Club. I'm like, did I say anything at all about the Mickey Mouse Club?
Wait till it starts again.
Oh
And it
God.
start again in a
Anyways,
second.
apparently that's dangerous to talk about. Yeah, so I used to have to, I was checking the status because I was waiting for my license to be reinstated after the accident. And I had to wake my 8-year-old up to say the letter S because the system would not recognize me saying the letter S.
Wow.
So I literally have concerns about if I ever had to do one of those video interviews, how would that actually affect my voice? English is my first language. Like I don't have a concern otherwise, but
Yeah.
there's something about how automated systems recognize my voice that I don't trust that they're going to get it right. So I
Wow.
have a
I've
lot of
never heard
concerns.
this. So we could totally test that in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
You know, we usually have people who have maybe a dialect or an accent, right? Like, or have a speech disability that we mostly concerned about. I've never had somebody who is a native English speaker who has automated systems that don't want to listen to you.
I
Um,
know it's so aggravating and so annoying. And I actually, I was working for a bank before my job was restructured, and they had an automated system as well too. And I had run tests for them demonstrating like how badly it couldn't recognize me and they didn't know how to handle that, right? Like, and again, I volunteered to be a subject for them so they could test it out, but I got restructured before that project could go anywhere. But yeah, no, I find that fascinating to me because again, like if this can happen to me, then how does it affect people who have bigger barriers than I face?
yeah,
Right? And
yeah,
that's where it's like the only thing that I know how to do anything about is to ask questions and to talk about it. And so that's why I'm very, very grateful to have you on the podcast so we can amplify this conversation because I do think that it's extremely important because it's only the tip of the iceberg where we are right now. So
yeah.
before we really get into it, you're a professor at New York University
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you're
In the
an
journalism
expert.
department, teaching
Sorry?
journal. I'm a professor in the journalism department teaching journalism, what I love. So I have like the dream job. I get to teach what I love to do. I get to do journalism. So you know, I feel very blessed with that job.
Yeah. And the AI really kind of fell in your lap too when you were actually in a cab and this guy told you
Yeah.
he had an interview with a robot. And
Yeah.
that question really just started open up
Set
like a
me
whole
up.
Pandora's box for you, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, you know, we always wonder like where do journalists get their ideas from? And this was literally like me in the back of a Lyft ride, talking to the driver, and he was like, you know, I've had a weird day. That doesn't ever happen to me. It's usually they say like, you know, oh, I'm fine. How are you? And he's like, yeah, I've had a weird day. And I was like, oh yeah, what happened? He's like, you know, I was interviewed by a robot for a job, and I was like, a robot? He's like, yeah, I got a call from a robot. So probably like a pre-recorded
Yeah.
voice, right? And he had applied for a baggage handler position at a local airport, and he was just really like, like just kind of I, I mean, to kind of almost speechless about the process because he was like, that has never happened, like so weird. And I took note of that and was like, oh, I've never heard of that. And then, I went to an AI conference a few weeks later and somebody talked about sort of AI and algorithms being used to check people's calendars and absences. And she also did mention, oh, they use it for hiring. And she told me about, the company HireVue, which is one of the largest providers in the space. And it sort of just started this. And when I started looking into it, I was like, whoa, I didn't know how ubiquitous it is. And I think sort of talking to your point of like sort of feeling like, whoa, like if it's inaccurate for me, what is it for people who have way less agency? And I think sort of the introduction of algorithms and AI and hiring does shift the power balance. It's always been more power with the employers, right?
Mm.
Because they make the final decision, of course. But now it feels like you could like sort of think about like what am I putting in my application, who do I list as a reference, so you were a little bit of the curator of your passport maybe, but now companies assess you with AI or without, even without knowing, right? Like you may be thinking you're doing a video interview, little did you know that they use AI on you, or you send in your application material, and if you send it through like LinkedIn or any of the large job platforms, they all use AI. No recruiter wants to have just a folder with 2,000 applicants, their resumes, right? Like there's all kinds of ranking. And the way this ranking happens is like really curious, right? Like how do we know that the person ranked at number one is better than the person ranked at 100? And those are like real interesting questions. And I started looking into that. And at the time, like a lot of the AI was first used on people, what the industry calls like high turnover, high volume jobs. So we hire a lot of people and you have a lot of turnover, often for like retail positions, fast food
Customer
positions.
service.
Yeah,
Yeah.
customer service call centers have a really high turnover too. So we see, in one of the tests that we did, the company is actually for a call center. So the video is like somebody, you have this irate person on the phone. How are you going to calm them down was one of the tests, right? So we see that, and I would say that folks who are looking for those kinds of job have probably one of the least power in the workplace and the least time, and get like, don't make often a living wage or not near living wage. And they're being subjected to this first, whereas like CEOs and other like sort of leadership positions very rarely get subjected to these kinds of tools. We've seen it like climb a little bit.
Yeah.
I've seen it used for flight attendants, for teachers now. I've seen it being used for a lot of recent graduates, because a lot of people feel, hiring managers feel like, oh, there's so many cool people. They all have great bachelor's degree, but they don't have a lot of work history. So they all look kind of alike. So let's do like a skills capability assessment, because we don't know a lot about them. So we see it used mostly for that. And we see it, I think what happened with the dawn of job platforms and now with generative AI, companies are flooded by
Yeah.
applications, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think there's a real need there. Like, IBM said they get about 5 million applications, Google get about 3 million applications per year. Goldman Sachs said for their summer internship alone, they got over 220,000 applications. I mean, there's not enough humans to go through all of them. And we know that humans are biased too. So a lot of companies turn to technology because they're drowning under applications. We now more than ever, they're drowning because, a lot of job applicants use generative AI to
Yeah.
generate a cover letter, to generate a resume. And now we have AI that can actually apply for you. So you don't even have to do anything.
Yeah.
Um,
The battle of who has the best AI.
it is AI versus AI out
Yeah.
there. And, sort of at one point you might have to ask, like, okay, what's still real here? Like, what are we talking about? Like,
Yeah.
what are the real capabilities? How do we actually hire the best people? And I don't think we necessarily have an answer there yet.
Well, and how many people are actually avoiding that whole process and just working the network? And that then becomes problematic too, because then it's like who you know, and
Yes.
in terms of equity and equality, that's automatically problematic because people tend to have closed networks, right? Like they like people who are like them, right?
Yes,
So
exactly. So you
if
need
you're
to,
building a process that's automatically going to be biased,
mm-hmm.
then is its example of systems working as systems are designed to work. And that's really what the outcome is that everybody wants. We don't
Yeah,
want a diverse workforce.
yeah.
That's a question that you have to ask, right?
Yeah. And especially like when you build tools based on the current workforce that you have, most
Yeah,
companies are not diverse, right? So the problem is that you might replicate
right,
sort of the historical inequities that you've built into your workforce by hiring more men or more white people, right, over time.
right,
And then the tools pick up their facial expressions, the words that they use, their manners, their way of behaving and game playing.
right.
So you might just hire more white men, which I don't think is anyone's intention, but is a likely outcome.
Right, because the systems have access to like your hierarchy through performance reviews or anything that's written, right? So like you have an example in the book about, this AI had learned that the name Thomas was
Oh
tied
yes, it's with
to
the
being a
resume
high
screeners. Yeah,
performer. And
yeah.
so if the resume happened to include the name Thomas, it was rated more high.
It was getting more points. So like, that my hypothesis is that this was a resume screener, that it was probably built with a bunch of resumes of people who were currently successful in the role, which often means the people who are doing the job now.
Yeah,
So you give the tool like 1,000 resumes of the people you have employed right now, or you have been recently employed the last 6 months or so, or made it to the last round of interviews. And you
yeah,
say those people are the successful people. And then the tool does a statistical analysis. And apparently in this statistical analysis, the word Thomas came up and became statistically significant. So then the tool gave people who had the word Thomas on their resume more points. So obviously any human knows that Thomas, the word Thomas, doesn't qualify you for anything.
right,
But a machine obviously doesn't have a conscience, and doesn't have any ethical ideas. And I should also say humans are also problematic, right? We know from like social science that like we send resumes with like sort of more Caucasian sounding names versus African
right.
American sounding names, right?
Yeah,
Like there's a lot of human bias too.
yeah,
Uh, that we know that people get fewer callbacks who have African American first sounding names, but like a machine was supposed to be objective, right? That's what
right,
these AI vendors sell, that it like democratizes hiring, it has no bias, it is absolutely fair. And that has not been the case. And I was really surprised when I talked to industrial organizational psychologists who said like all of the tools that he looked at had problems.
yeah,
Another employment lawyer told me like every fourth tool he looked at, resume parser, had kind of problematic keywords. He found in one of them the word Africa and African American were used as keywords. Another tool, the word baseball. If you had the word baseball on your resume, you got more points. If you had the word softball on your resume, you got fewer points, which points
which
to
is which
gender
is an
discrimination.
excellent reason that you don't want to put your activities, your after curriculars, after work
Yeah,
curriculars
and I
in.
don't know what happens for the people who don't have any hobbies, right? Like we don't know if they get like penalized or not, right? But
Right.
that's the problem. Like a tool will look at everything that's on a resume.
Yeah.
Doesn't know that like maybe Python, a programming language, is more important skill for a software developer job than hobbies, which really should be not be part of the decision making at all. Because
Right.
hobbies often say more about like your socioeconomic background. Like if you put snowboarding or skiing, probably means in some societies that you have more money than others, that you come from a
Right.
privileged background because you can afford it.
Yeah.
That means more, that tells you more about your background than your actual skills and capabilities to do the job. Like,
Right.
unless it's a skiing instructor, you probably need skiing skills, but other
Right.
than that, it doesn't have any bearing on the job. And we see this again and again in a lot of these tools. And that does worry me. And we have so little oversight where in this cases, the vendors themselves didn't find the problem, right? It was like when a vendor talked to an employer and about using the system, and then some of the employers do their due diligence. They bring in outside counsel, they
Right.
start checking the system, and then they find the problem. And a lot of times companies use deep neural networks, which you don't need to know what that means, but it means that you have training data to build the model and you can look at the results, but you don't necessarily know what happens inside the machine. We can ask the machine what exactly happened, but most companies don't do that. So a lot of AI vendors don't know well, what is the machine inferring upon? And what we see a lot of machine learning, there's been like a famous example where, I think, somebody built a tool that was supposed to understand what's the difference between huskies and wolves and fed a lot of pictures in
Mm,
the model. And, the model miraculously learned what's a husky and a wolf because if you send in a new photo, it was like, oh, husky, yes, until it didn't work. And then the folks asked the tool, well, what did you infer upon? Was it the nose? Was it like the fur of the husky or the wolf? How did you know the difference? And the tool highlighted the snow in the background of the huskies because it
yeah.
turned out the huskies had like snow in the background, the wolf did not. So the tool that actually didn't know,
The
didn't learn
wolves didn't have
what's the
snow?
difference between husky and wolves. What?
The wolves didn't have snow?
Um, I
Or
think
the
the wolf,
huskies didn't have
no, the
snow?
huskies. I don't remember actually.
Oh, I would have expected
But,
wolves to
but
have more snow. That's all.
one of them didn't have snow,
Yeah,
and that was and that's what the tool learned. And so
yeah,
that's what we call, and this is actually more prevalent than you think in these systems. Like we think it does X, but when we test it, we learned that it doesn't do anything. So like there's another example with like the COVID cough. Like during the pandemic, there were a lot of
mm,
companies that tried to build AI systems where you like cough into the phone to your doctor. The tool will tell you, do you have COVID or not, right? So,
right.
and that never worked out. And what we saw in even like academic literature where people said, oh, we found the COVID cough. When you tested it, what it actually found was that it had the people who were had the COVID cough were most often in the ICU. So you heard the beeping of the machines, and the people who didn't have COVID were in, whatever scenario where they were
Right.
coughing. So the tool had learned that COVID means machines beeping in the background. So obviously hadn't learned
Wow.
anything about COVID. So
Yeah.
we see this again and again. It's a real problem. And I am not too hopeful that obviously the hiring space isn't spared from this problem because I found this problem now many times. And that's just, as you said, the tip of the iceberg, right? Like I haven't looked at all the tools. I don't have access to all the tools. So we need a lot more scrutiny. We need a lot more testing. So
Right.
I always hope that people in talent acquisition or in hiring who hear this or hear me speak, like, please, please, please test these tools and do these like super cheapo tests that I do. If I can speak German to a tool and still get a 6 out of 9 English proficiency score, like that the tool probably doesn't work. Like, do some
Right.
kind of testing and to really understand what does this tool do. And if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, you really might want to rethink using this for hiring because it matters who gets a job. It matters to job seekers. Like I'm relying on like making
Right.
money to put food on the table, to have an apartment. I'm nervous before a job interview because it matters if I get the job. I know for employers often it feels like, so many candidates, we reject them anyways, but it does matter. And I'm sure it mattered to the hiring manager and the talent acquisition manager at one point that they did get the job, right?
Well,
So
and there's legal ramifications as well too.
sure.
So, like if you're using tools that have built-in discrimination, like you said, like they're learning things that aren't necessarily relevant. I mean, an example would be like just university related to like socioeconomic class, right? Like if you're filtering out your AI tools, filtering out, Harvard or whatever university, I mean, there's long time studies and proof that show that those aren't necessarily tied to skills and ability, but those are definitely tied to socioeconomic class, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like, especially with the resume parser, like there was one example that it had highlighted, had like learned that Syria and Canada are
Yeah.
predictors of success. So everyone else
I
was
was
from
fascinated with that one since I'm from Canada.
exactly. I was like, look, the Canadians, like they're,
Yeah.
moving forward at a faster clip. But what this means for people from other places that they would be potentially get discriminated against, which is illegal in the United States, right? Like
Yeah.
they're illegal place here. I think what's a little bit problematic is like that the tools themselves sort of like obfuscate some of the decision making, right? Because we don't actually
Yes.
know that Canada and Syria were indicators of success, which we shouldn't be using because unless somebody digs deep into the system, we just see the results of the ranking and they look very convincing. Like even when I did tests,
Yeah.
and I know that these tests are bogus, that I was like, okay, there's no science behind them. But when you still see your score, you're like 78%, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's really hard to not see that score and feel like, oh, that means I'm this. Like you
Yeah.
still put meaning towards it, even though you
Yeah,
know it's like actually meaningless.
yeah.
And I think
'Cause-
that's what's really problematic, right? As a hiring manager, you get this list of like 1,000 people, and you're going to call the first 20. I'm not going to call 998 that person, even though I have no idea how this ranking was really put together, right? I assume the machine, somebody did their due diligence, and these machines work and pick the best people. But I think it was kind of interesting from one survey that Joe Fuller did at Harvard. We know that, he surveyed like 2,200 or so people in leadership. When their company used an AI tool, almost 90% said, oh, we know that they reject qualified candidates. So we know that they don't actually fulfill that promise that they find the most qualified candidate. But we still use it because I think the tools make hiring so much more efficient, so much easier, cut down the number of days that you're hiring. And that is something that companies care about, which I think
Right.
is probably the wrong incentive. Like, who
Yes.
cares if you found somebody in 2 days? Are they the most qualified? Can they actually do the job the best? If it takes 3 weeks, maybe that's okay. But that isn't necessarily the incentive that is being used.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's right. And it comes down to trust and accountability, really. Like, are you walking the talk and are you being responsible for what it is you're doing? And that seems to be lacking in companies that are actually using these AI systems.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And
and again, I don't know that that's their intention, but it is
well,
the
I don't think it's
outcome.
at all their intention.
Yeah,
This is like sort of a tale of like good intentions maybe gone bad or having unintended consequences, right? Like I don't think actually anyone building these systems or using these systems has any ill intent. I
right,
think everyone like really does probably want to diversify the workforce, want to give more people a chance, um, but it's not really fully understanding like, well, how are we actually using these systems? How do these systems make decisions?
yeah,
Because they are so um, literally kind of black boxes, like that what we always say. And I think that's really problematic. And I think, a lot of companies come into this, they want to have they want to save money, they want to have more efficient hiring technology. So they don't want to necessarily now hire someone to oversee these systems and test them continuously. Like
right.
they want something easier and faster. So they're not going to maybe apply like a lot of scrutiny to this. They're just like, okay, it works, it cuts down hiring, we need to employ fewer people. That's
Yeah.
all I want.
Well, and I mean, it's basically software as a service, right? So like the vendors could be updating the software as they go, right? So they really should keep on top of that. I mean, just from a compliance point of view, you would think that you'd want to make sure that you're reviewing the terms and conditions every time there's an update to the software. Um,
I mean,
I don't understand where the risk people are. Like, where's the cybersecurity and the risk assessment that goes along with this?
yeah, and I'm sometimes wondering about this too, because like I reported very early on in 2018 after I met the Lyft driver, and the next year I was working for the Wall Street Journal, and we did this like 10-minute, it was a video investigation because we felt like, oh, this is, it's about video interviews mostly and other AI and hiring, but like it felt like, oh, we want to show this in video. And we looked at HireVue, and HireVue at the time still used like facial expression
Mm.
analysis,
Yeah,
intonation of our voice and analysis, and it also transcribed the words that you used. And when I started digging deeper, at first I was like so surprised. I was like, oh, I didn't know that facial expression in job interviews are predictive of success in a job. What interesting way to measure things. And then when I dug deeper and I talked to experts, they're like, there's no science here. I was like, wait, what? There's no science here?
yeah.
They're like, yeah, we don't have any science what facial expressions you have to have in a job interview that predicts how good you should be at any given job. And I was like, oh, but they're using it. And then I talked to folks, there is the effective computing companies that put out the tools. They also say we have the same 6 emotions. If you're smiling, you're happy. If you're frowning, you're angry. And when I talked to psychologists, they said like, oh yeah, that's like 60 years ago. So we thought that, but we know now that like different cultural backgrounds, different societies, we don't have the same emotions. Like we are likely to have similar emotions, but not always.
Right.
And so this is not predictive at all either. And I was like, this is really problematic. But large Fortune 500 companies were using the technology without questioning it. from what I know. So I was really surprised that I was like, I do wonder, like, where are the risk people? Where are the compliance people? I don't know
Yeah.
if they reach into the hiring space, or they feel like because there is like almost no way for people to get access to these systems. Like if the person who builds the system doesn't know what the tool infers upon, like the people using it, the companies don't know it, job seekers are never going to find out. So maybe the risk is
Yeah.
very low.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like there's no transparency. Like even as a job seeker, like it's only because of like uh press releases and whatnot. Like I knew that Scotiabank was using Plum, for example, and that's why I was researching Plum, right? But most of the time they don't identify who's providing the services, right?
Yeah,
So
and I think after, like some sort of scandals, right? Like Amazon tried to build an algorithmic tool that scans resumes, and they built a tool that was downweighing women. If you had the word woman or women on your
yeah,
resume, it would downweight you. So I think, they got a lot of backlash for that.
yeah.
So I think since that, companies have also been very careful to publicize anything bad about these tools, right? Like I have talked to, like after the book came out, I got lucky. I mean, and before too, but like really after the book came out, I had talked to a lot of CHROs, like chief human resource officers, chief people officers,
Yeah.
and like, oh yeah, we used that tool. We had the same questions and problems that you uncovered, and then we like stopped using it. And I was like, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. Did you tell anyone? Because company X is still using it. Could you publicly say that you found out these tools didn't work? And they're like, no, we can't publicly acknowledge that because they're afraid of class action lawsuits. They're afraid of
Right.
bad press, right? That they use a tool that's flawed.
Yeah.
Um, you kind of can understand it, but the problem is like we don't really have much progress then, right? Like no one calls out the bad actors.
Yeah.
Or not the bad actors, but like when tools don't work, they don't call out the companies. And I think the vendors are unlikely uh to dig deep and really check out their systems and change them. They do
Oh
want to bring
yeah.
product to market and
Yeah.
sell, right? And there's
Yeah.
still enough companies that merely believe them that
Yeah.
this works. So yeah.
So what's the solution? Like you've been on record saying that, regulation is needed, government involvement is needed.
Yeah, I mean, we just had a recent election in this country, so I'm not
Yes.
sure under a Trump administration there will be more regulation, right? Like, in fact, we've seen a lot of deregulation under the last Trump administration. So I'm not very hopeful. We've
Right.
seen some, forward movement under the Biden administration. There has been like sort of AI, not laws, but like hopeful, like we should really look into this,
Mm.
and there has been like progress, but we really haven't seen an agency stepping in, starting to like approve these tools or test them or anything. I think there isn't a whole lot of political will, I think, to do that, and maybe also not a lot of knowledge, because
Yes.
it is kind of tricky to, like, and I wouldn't recommend that government agency do sort of this like little testing that I do. I sometimes like do this thing where I bring a question to like computer scientists and sociologists, and we do larger studies.
Yeah.
That's how we found the problem in the hallucinations and whisper. That's also how we found out that some AI tools who take your personality from your LinkedIn or your Twitter feed don't work, and that you have multiple personalities, and even the same AI tool has different things finding out about your personality.
Mm.
It looks at your LinkedIn or Twitter, which is, against the theory. Like if you use personality, you would assume that it is a stable thing, right? Otherwise, if it changes every 5 minutes, then you really shouldn't use it for hiring. So
Right.
we have
But
a lot
also
of
like, I mean, social media is a filter to begin with, right? Like who you are on LinkedIn may be very different from who you present yourself to be on Twitter or Threads or whatever.
I
You
absolutely agree
you
with that.
adopt
Yeah.
personas, or at least some people do.
Yeah, but I think the companies would say, well, you didn't write this to get a job. So especially your tweets. So there's something about you that you're not hiding, right? This idea like to look under the hood of a job seeker,
Yeah.
it is it's pretty prevalent. I think the same idea with like checking your facial expressions, like
Yeah.
you get something up about yourself that you weren't even kind of knowing about. And we know from history of companies analyzing like handwriting and other things in hiring that, there is no science there.
There is
Uh,
no science. Yeah.
but we've seen this again and again because it does feel so intuitive, right? It does
Yeah.
feel intuitive that something in your writing says something about you. So I could analyze that and find the real you that you can't hide. Um, but so we fall into that again. So, those are kind of assumptions that worry me in the space that we
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. But Europe isn't having the same sort of problem because of the GDPR, right? And the privacy.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I do think that Europe is like a more regulated
Mm.
place on earth, right? Like we see much more regulation coming out of the European Union. And we see, we call those like omnibus legislation because they're large uh, uh, um, laws. So one is GDPR, the General Data Protection Privacy Law.
Yeah.
Even the UK adopted, although it's no longer in the European
Yeah.
Union. And I was like lucky to find who I call like patient zero.
Yeah.
Martin Birch, who got his, who had to take a plum assessment, sort of like a gamified personality test to, sort of to really basically describe it. You get some, I don't know, you do some Tetrising kind of games, and you have to like answer a couple of questions. What would you in the workplace if you encounter this or that? And they come up with the personality and capability analysis of you. So he was kind of like he had applied for a job in data, and he was like, I was data scraping all day at my current job. So he was like, I was really surprised that I wasn't asked to do an assessment on like my capability of like data analysis and data scraping, which I do in my job, which I applied for at Bloomberg. But I was asked to like answer these questions about my personality and puzzle Tetris and other things. And he was also surprised that he pretty much got an instant within a day a rejection. He's like, huh, for a job that I'm already doing that I applied for at this other company. That's interesting. So he was in a journalism adjacent job, right? Like he was
Mm.
working for a news organization.
Yeah.
He wasn't like a reporter, but he sort of knew what reporters do. So
Right.
he knew about the GDPR. He asked for his data, and he got the data, and he scored really low, and then he found out that Bloomberg had automatically rejected him, which is under some other laws is not legal. You have to like disclose that if you use automatic decision making. Bloomberg didn't disclose that, so he started like a legal inquiry, and he settled with the company. But it's one of the first people that I ever heard from that like actually had the data to look at and like ask about it exactly. And I think that happens so rarely. And it doesn't happen very often in Europe, right? Because a lot of Europeans don't even know that they have this right or they know how to get it. And then when you get the data, it's also really hard to really understand it. Okay, well,
Yeah.
a capability or not, I don't know if it's right or not. There's no authority to go to and say like, well, I don't think it's right.
Right.
Uh, who would you call? So we see a little bit more, and now we see the EU AI Act, which actually kind of it outlaws outright the emotion recognition. So that kind of tools will no longer exist in the European Union legally. If you use it, it would be illegal.
Yeah.
And there's a high bar for hiring, which I'm really happy about because I've been saying for a while now that I think, hiring is high risk decision making. Like it is important to understand who gets hired and when not. So it should be up there with like other high risk things about like who gets a mortgage, who gets a loan, who goes to jail, like those are, or how long you go to jail. Those are also high risk uh, uh, decision making, and hiring should be one of them. So there is a little bit more scrutiny that companies have to face. We not exactly know how it's going to interpret it in every country, in every like sort of societal system.
Yeah.
So, there's like general guidance. How is this actually going to be implemented? It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So we're not 100% sure, but we see, a little bit of that. We've seen promising things in California, but they've recently been turned down by the governor there. With the Trump administration, I'm not seeing that we'll have a lot of regulation, maybe on the state level, but not on the federal level, probably not.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. I do think there needs to be more regulation, but I think actually, I don't know if every regulation will catch
Yeah.
every problematic use case. So
So,
I think that like companies need to speak out and push the vendors to do better, or we need to have more non-for-profit initiatives to build tool in the public interest, right? Like I sort of think as the barriers of building some of these tools come down and make it easier for a lot of people to do so, the question is like, well, could civil society build tools in the public interest that are better than some of the commercial companies put out there? And we can actually make public how the tools were built, what the assumptions are built in, and all of those things that we criticize that we don't know from commercial suppliers. That's
Right.
also an idea.
Are you familiar with Amy Webb? She's a futurist.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I've interviewed her actually for an article
Oh, have you? Okay.
years
So
back. So,
what
yeah.
do you think about her point? Her point is that she thinks that regulation is going to be so challenging, especially to get it consistent across the globe. And really, it has to be a financial incentive for companies to really build it ethically and responsibly. And if companies then hire the or use the AI produced by that company, then they get a reward for choosing the ethical AI company. Do you think that that's
It would
viable?
be, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's viable because I think I do agree that regulation can't catch them all, right? Like it's not really going to work out. It might work for like the European Union, but that doesn't necessarily transfer to all these other jurisdictions, right? So it is really problematic and it can't catch them all. So if we rely on industry itself, like maybe a system where we reward or we have some sort of certification, right? We
Yeah,
require like we publicly shame companies who don't use certification. But the
yeah,
question is like, does the certification work? And I would argue that we've seen in some industries that we sort of have like fig leaf
yeah,
certifications. We've seen this about like, diamonds, where diamonds come from. We see
right,
this, we call it greenwashing, right? That companies
yes,
like buy a certification that they look like a green, organic, super environmentally friendly company, but then they dump their trash in a landfill and they actually don't recycle, whatever they promise. It's actually not true. They're just buying the
right,
certification.
yeah,
So I'm worried about that too, that we then have another level of that looks like this is certified and this
yeah,
is a good algorithm, then
right.
no one looks at it and knows like, is this actually good or not? And sort of so I wish we had like clear standards on how to judge algorithms. I mean, they're sort of being developed in the European Union, but there's still a lot of like, we don't know a lot of things here.
Right.
So I hope we will have standards, and maybe if we had a little bit more transparency and demand accountability and explainability. A lot of times when I do some of these tests, like talking German to the tool, and then I got a 6 out of 9 English proficiency, and I talk to the developers. Before we publish, we always go back,
Yeah,
ask for comment, and also like, maybe we made a mistake, right? Like we want to know. So we
yeah,
go back to the developers. And I was listening and listening, and I was like, wow. And he was like, it's maybe because German and English is in this 5D space and the languages overlap. And I was like, 5D? I was like, I'm really not understanding. I was like, I can't follow. Like, I was like, can you just explain to me, if you were in front of a judge, why I was scored 6 out of 9? Like, can you just
yeah,
explain it, how you would explain in front of a judge? And he couldn't. And I was like, 5D doesn't mean anything to me. It seems very complex. Can you just explain it, like how the score came together? And I think if people can't do that, that tells us something. Like if you can't explain why this person was scored this way, we
yeah,
really have a problem. So I think we need much more explainability, transparency. If we could get that through government regulators, that would be great. If we could have like benchmarks, standards. But we've now seen in New York there is a law that companies who use AI in hiring or algorithms in hiring, they do have to get an audit every year. It's sort of up to the companies to actually kind of decide how much AI and algorithms they use. So that's kind of flawed. And then the audits also kind of unclear necessarily. It's like usually follows, a lot of people follow the 4/5 rule, which is actually already a guideline by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the US. So it's kind of like just auditing what's already being audited. And we know that those kinds of audits are really flawed. They just look at different genders, like male and females, and
mm,
different races against each other. They don't look at the intersection
right,
of like black women versus Caucasian men, for example. And we know at those intersections where marginalized identities cross over, that's where I see most of the problems in the system, because marginalized groups are underrepresented in the tool, in the training data, often not the tools.
right.
then they become underrepresented in the tools and the models. And then we have sort of the problem multiplies. And so we don't look at that. There's no mandate to look at that. And we've actually, when somebody looked at that, we found problems. So, I'm hopeful-ish that
Yeah.
this will help a little bit.
Let's talk about the Whisper network. So you just
Oh, yeah.
recently published an article in the Associated Press. I read it this morning. And it's basically about how you found problems in terms of a transcription, having a hallucination. And honestly, this is one of the use cases that I use AI for. Often when I do a podcast, I'll take the transcript and I'll just put it into Perplexity. I prefer that. And it spits out my show notes. And I read it briefly, and usually it's reasonable. I don't really have a concern about it. I mean, also it's that doesn't have a lot of effect, right? Couldn't tell you anybody who's ever called back to me saying you wrote really great show notes, right? So I don't spend a lot of time on it, right? Um, but the Whisper network is actually being used in hospitals, and this is where it can be very interesting in terms of um, transcripts for medical use that are then actually they're deleting the audio. And so the
Yeah.
only record that remains is this transcript. And you found in your test that there are hallucinations and the transcripts are including text that actually was never said.
Yeah, just like ChatGPT, but this is a transcription tool, right? Like sort of a benign tool that companies use every day, people use every day. It's very ubiquitous.
Yeah,
Um, so let me take one step back and tell you how we got to this, because it actually relates to AI and hiring.
of course.
And it relates to like, that I work with computer scientists and sociologists. So I've looked into like AI one-way video interviews, right? And like even regulators have asked me, and I've wondered about this too, like what happens with people who have a speech disability, or have a dialect, or have, who have an accent, exactly what we talked about. If they use these systems or are being asked to use these systems, the tool then takes the audio and transcribes it into text. So is it fair to people with different dialects or accent and speech disabilities? So I was asked by regulators and others, and I'm like, why are you asking me? I'm just a lone journalist. How would I? But I was like, well, I guess no one is looking into this.
Yeah.
So I talked to a computer scientist and a sociologist, and I was like, I think we should really test this. So I asked the companies, like, which tools do you use, right? Because most companies in the space don't build their own tools. You buy one on the market because there's large companies that use those. So we took those tools, and then as we were doing, we found a database with audio recordings of people who have a speech disability and people who don't have a speech disability. And we had about 13,000 recordings as a whole. And we ran it through these transcription software. And as we were starting to do the experiment, we also heard about OpenAI's new Whisper tool, which everyone was like raving about, and millions of people were already using. It's open source, it's very cheap, it has a very high accuracy rate that everyone was raving about. It can also use, can translate between different languages. And we were like, okay, this seems to be like one of the market leaders. We should also test that. And when we looked at the scatter plots, we did see that for Whisper, like there were very low error rates, but there were some plots that had like ginormous error rates. So we were like, how do you get 1,000% error rate? Like everything must be wrong in these transcripts, compared to the ground truth. So we did a human intelligence investigation and looked at these tools because, we were like, did we upload a wrong clip? Like what
Right.
happened here? And when we looked into it, we saw that it, like in some instances, just hallucinated whole stories, like made up whole paragraphs that weren't there in the first place. And when we did a close analysis, like it also like had like facial commentary. It had like hallucinated a new medication, like all these new things that like were never there. Um,
Medication that didn't actually exist.
yes, it was
Wasn't it
activated.
psychoactivated?
Yeah, it was a hyperactivated antibiotics.
Right.
Never heard of that.
Oh.
So, it also like hallucinated violence and all kinds of things because, it learned from everything on the internet. So like the stuff that we put on the internet and in books and stuff, it learns from that. But we hadn't seen this in a transcription software. And when I started looking at GitHub, where a lot of like open source developers congregate, there were just like so many entries of like, what is happening? What is this tool doing? I was like, oh, okay, we're not the only one. So it wasn't like a problem that only we encountered. This is like much, much bigger. And then I found this company called Nabla that does, we see this a lot now, medical transcription. So where doctor-patient conversations are being recorded, and then a system transcribes it and summarizes and does these doctor notes, right? So your doctor can spend more time with you instead of like documenting everything and taking notes. It sounds like a great idea, but some companies, they use Whisper. And Nabla isn't the only one that uses Whisper, but it is the only one that I talk to. So they work with about at least 30,000 or so medical providers in the US and large medical systems and hospital systems. And, they built their own tool on top of like the Whisper interface. And it summarizes the recordings. And what the tool also does, because of privacy concerns, it throws away the underlying recording. So if I'm a doctor, I look at my notes and I'm like, was that really said? I can go back to the transcript, but the transcript might not be accurate because there might be hallucinations in there. And I can't go
Mm.
back to the actual recording to check, was that actually said? Like, did anyone talk about antibiotics? Or, whatever
Right.
the hallucination might be. And, to a lot of people who, look at AI, this was really problematic, that a company was using that, not, and I also asked them, I was like, we know that Whisper hallucinates. And they're like, oh, yeah, we know too. We try to mitigate it. And I was like, oh, were you able to get rid of it 100%? Because I'd never heard of anybody being able to mitigate it 100%. And they were like, no, but I think we have it under control. And I was like, okay. Um,
So what
so
are the impacts of having a medical transcript that is inaccurate and includes a hallucination? So that could be, it could go to court. It
yeah,
could be used
I mean,
as
here's for
evidence to
malpractice.
actually deny coverage for
Yeah.
insurance claims.
Yeah, I mean, it also is in your presumably in your electronic medical records forever, right? So you might have like,
Right. So it could
it
lead to misdiagnosis.
yeah,
It,
it could have lifelong implications. You might also get a prescription for the wrong medication,
right.
all kinds of consequences, right? Like,
Right. It could
uh,
even, I mean, honestly, with the changes in law, like if it picks up somehow that you had an illegal abortion, does that then lead to legal consequences?
yeah, I mean, I think that's
Even if
another
that's not
question,
something
right?
that ever happened.
Yeah, and I think that's, it could be that it hallucinates something, but it could also be like what happens if the transcript is actually accurate and the transcript is used for more, it's not protected by HIPAA, right? Which is
Mm,
the privacy laws in the United States, because that mandates that medical information stays private between a patient and a doctor.
right,
But it's also now shared with other companies. And
right,
what we've seen is like now patients are asked to sign a release to actually sign away their HIPAA rights that, says like, I acknowledge that the transcript and the recording sometimes is being shared with like, some large tech companies, these providers. And that does worry me too, that like, when we go to the doctor, we get this like, tablet where you just sign things and, just sign here, you don't even read it. And people aren't even aware of like the potential consequences that these like very personal, I think a lot of things that we tell our doctor, we might not want to tell others, very private
yeah,
information gets shared with large tech companies, then they use it against for training data and other things. And who knows who uses it, who is being sold to the next time. What happens if a company goes bankrupt? Like that is like usually very valuable material that then the next company buys. And I
right.
mean, we've
Or
seen.
even just like you run the test and go, tell me what you know about this person. And all of a sudden your private medical records show up in like a general inquiry that anybody in the world could actually ask.
Yeah, and I hope that
Terrifying.
they're like anonymized, but we also know from like anonymized data that they can be
Yeah,
de-anonymized pretty easily, right? There's a lot of data on us out there, so it does worry me. And I know of companies who use this kind of medical data to then predict. This is what happens to people. They need a therapist. They need back surgery. So, like, we already know it's not 100% protected. I'm not saying it's the specific transcript, but there is like data lakes of medical data on Americans and other people out there that is already used for kind of predictions and things that I think people would find very creepy if they know why they're being suggested that everyone has a bad day and they should see a therapist. I might, when my company sends me a nudge like that, I might be like, oh yeah, maybe I'm having a bad day. If I would know that the company has derived this information because I through my spouse of my medical benefits, and that might be a signal of divorce and I need a therapist, I might feel very different that my company shares that kind of information with a third party provider.
Yeah, it's so concerning.
Yeah. That's probably going to be the subject of my next book is AI in healthcare. Kind
Yeah, no,
of like
that's
the
that's
workplace,
fascinating.
because we see a lot of AI also moving into the workplace, right? That can find out like, are we depressed? Are we anxious? And I think there is something that like, if you share this with your doctor, I hope it gets protected. I mean, we just talked about that the protection
Yeah,
isn't ubiquitous, but also like what happens in the workplace with like
yeah.
when we have these kinds of tools, like are they used only for the benefit of employees, or are they also being used against them,
That
right?
was
Like,
one of the questions in your book that I found the most fascinating because it goes back initially to like my interest in eightfold, which was, if you identify transferable skills that are valuable, but that employee doesn't necessarily want to use that skill because they find it draining or they have trauma associated with, that work in the past or whatever reason they don't want to do it anymore. What are the repercussions for turning down what the company perceives to be an opportunity
yeah.
to benefit from your skill?
Yeah. And, I think also like, what I thought is interesting about Eightfold is like it has these like career laddering
Yeah,
that like, people in your position did this, they became vice president in 5 years because they did X, Y, and Z. Here's like some, LinkedIn learning or whatever, learning platform that you can
yeah,
use to get those skills. And that's interesting. So like, but it could also be used for managers to find like high performers.
yeah.
And it could also be used to find maybe what we might see from the platform as low performers, right? People who didn't advance in 5 years to vice president, who took longer.
Right.
But the platform doesn't tell you why that is. Like, are
Yeah.
they slow learners, or did they have difficult pregnancy, or did they have to take care of their parents and, didn't
Right.
want,
Yeah. There's
uh,
multiple reasons why you might
yeah.
not have
And so like,
performed.
when I asked them that question, I was like, well, it could also be used to penalize people. They're like, well, everyone knows about it. Like the employer knows about it, about our assessment of them, and the employee knows as well, and the employer. So, I mean, you could like question it. And I was like, but I don't
Yeah,
even
but
know if the
then
man uses it.
if you're in a state that has at will employment and you don't like the answer to that particular question, then you could also use it as a reason to terminate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally, exactly. And I think there isn't a whole lot of protection. It could also be
There's
that
not.
maybe you used another learning platform, right? Like to have new skills, and that get never registered in the company's system, which uses like, maybe another vendor.
Or you read a book.
Yes, and that never is part of the system either, right? Like we can
No.
think of so many use cases that are
Yeah.
actually not part of the what a company collects on us.
Yeah.
And there's no way to like manually entry that and be like, no, but I did get these skills somewhere else. And we don't necessarily know how company executives or managers actually use these systems. And I think that opens it up for some doubtful things. And we've seen this unfortunately again and again, that companies like collect data for one thing, and then they want to analyze it, and it's actually not then their layoffs, they want to look at the data that they collected for one thing. It's actually not used for layoffs, but not supposed to be used for layoffs, but they still use it because they have the data, right? Once you have
Because you
the
can't unknow it, right?
it's exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's another problem. Once you have the data, once you do the analysis, like if I think that you are at flight risk, meaning you're going to leave the company, there are these indicators that say like, this person is 80% likely to leave the company in a year. Like, am I a manager and I want to keep you? Like, maybe I'll give you a promotion. Did you deserve it? I don't know. Probably somebody else is not going to get a promotion or a raise because there's only a limited pod. And I only do that based on this flight risk indicator. How can I unsee that? Am I going to put you for forward for leadership training if you think you're already one way out. I don't know.
Right.
But the question is like, you don't even know that the tool predicted that you're with one foot out the door, and you may or may not be, right? Like it's
Right,
not.
exactly. Like there might be something keeping you
um,
there, like a personal relationship that isn't going to show up on any tool
Yeah, I mean, it's just a
because
prediction.
you follow the advice to have friends at work.
I mean, there are so many things connected to this.
Yeah,
It's just wild. So,
it is. So I wanted to make sure that we were going back to the book. You've fabulous book. I highly recommend it. Really, really
thank
great
you.
job. Thank you. What are the successes that you had with the book that you really want to highlight because it's done so well?
Yeah, I mean, I got really lucky that I think, it was like a topic that is really in the zeitgeist, right? Like
Yeah.
so, and I think a lot of job seekers also feel like, whoa, I've heard of algorithms, how do they really work? And I do think that people in talent acquisitions are also like thinking like, do these tools work? And like, they may have like similar questions. So I think it was also really interesting for them. So I've been lucky to like talk in actually like HR talent acquisition conferences. And I'm very grateful for that because I think those are the people that actually have maybe more than job seekers, actually maybe the power to actually investigate these tools, maybe make changes, right? I've also spoken at data science and technology companies for the people who build these tools to be like much more um, thoughtful and think through and like talk to different people and not just assume that they're domain experts about hiring when really they have no clue how to really hire and what are the best case scenarios and how to not discriminate. So I also tell them like, here's how what you should avoid, and here's exactly how you avoid it. Like, don't do this, don't do that. So I'm really grateful that I feel like people who built the technology and who use the technology are actually listening. And then I love just connecting with like readers from all over the world. It's kind of amazing when you get a message from like Brazil and the next day from Sweden. Somebody read your book, was really meaningful to them. Like I was just like very honored. And then recently I gave a TED talk about the subject. So
Oh,
I
I
think
listened to the
getting
podcast. Yeah.
getting new
Yeah.
finding new audiences. So hopefully, it's also reached some lawmakers. So hopefully there will be change. And I'm just like so grateful for people who pick up the book, spend so much time with it. And I hope to illuminate a new world that maybe they didn't know about. And it's like endlessly fascinating to me how we quantify human beings.
Yeah.
So I hope that like sort of rubs off on people too, that like it is kind of interesting, like how we try to make sense of the world
Yeah.
in different ways.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So, and it validated me because I'm like, I don't have a journalistic background at all, but I went back and I'm like, oh, look, I was doing really a lot of the similar work. And I'm like, oh, I
Exactly. And I
gotta
think that's what I
kind of
want to
have my own
encourage.
journalistic instincts to say, hey, I'm noticing these things. This is good.
Yeah, welcome to our world. Like you
I
should
know.
write the next book about AI and hiring and in the world of work. But I actually think like I always want to encourage people. I tell them like steal my methods. Like
Yeah.
some of them are super basic, some of them are more elaborate, but like
Yeah.
use some of these methods to scrutinize these AI tools because as we can see, like technology companies just put out these tools. And for example, with
Uh-huh.
Whisper, OpenAI knew about the hallucinations. In fact, they put it in the paper. I mean, they did say in one of their disclosures it shouldn't be used for high risk use cases. Lots of people don't read the model card, so they ignored the advice from the company they took it from. Like, it's not like they didn't know, but you kind of wonder, like, why did they release a flawed system? Like, I mean, there's all kinds of questions that we can ask about this. So I
Yeah.
feel like we need to like be much more skeptical users, testers of these
Oh,
technologies
yeah.
and like
Yeah.
push back. So I want everyone to steal my methods and like do and invent your own ones, test these tools, like push back against the companies so we build better tools.
Yeah.
Because you think that like AI can be transformative technology. The jury is still out if we use it to predict the future of job seekers. It's really a question if AI can help with that. But I think it's really helpful in other use cases. But in some maybe we shouldn't use it and we should push back and like
Yeah.
highlight how it doesn't work. So I think everyone can do the work. We don't have enough journalists to do all this work.
Yeah. Well, this is what my fourth podcast episode about it. So I'm doing my part. So
Thank you. Yeah. And if anyone wants to be in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. You find my email on my faculty page. There's only one Hilke Schellmann. Please be in touch. Like I'm happy to. I always love to like hear from job seekers or people who work in talent acquisition. I love talking to folks. It might take a few days till I respond
Of
because I
course, yeah.
teach students and I have a
Yeah.
bunch of obligations. I also have a 4-year-old kid. I like to spend time with, and she demands scavenger hunts for sweets with her mom.
Yeah.
So, but I love to be in touch with people, and I'm so grateful for everyone who's listening and has wrote me and has engaged with the book. It's just wonderful.
Okay, well, that's good.
But
We'll
thank you
make
for
sure
having
that everything is linked in the show notes. And I really appreciate you making the time. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.